Kingdom Hearts is a 2002 action RPG that crosses over Final Fantasy with animated films from that soulless mega corporation that won't stop until it owns all of entertainment. Mostly Kingdom Hearts focuses on the Disney stuff, with some Final Fantasy characters in a small handful of worlds. Most of the Final Fantasy representation in Kingdom Hearts is from the other aspects of the game, mixing Final Fantasy game design and aesthetics with Disney iconography, from the action RPG gameplay to the items to the character designs. The main humans, for example, are a mix of Disney's more cartoony style with Final Fantasy's more anime-like RPG aesthetics. I mean, there's a reason they faded that big. You know, most of my experience with Disney is with these games. I mean, the anime movies the games are based on are fine. They're fine, but Disney's anime movies have never really been my thing. They're not bad for the most part, but, you know, other movies have captured my interest more. Now, anime-style video games, that is more my thing. The game opens in a weird dark void with Sora standing on some glass pane art of Disney princesses. The opening and the initial tutorial is more ephemeral and dreamlike. From the visuals to the music, and hey, it's nice to have a mostly text tutorial be somewhat interesting for once. The opening, while slow, is honestly a good way to introduce the game in my opinion. From setting up the dynamics and stakes, to introducing the game mechanics. Explicitly in the tutorial, but also more implicitly in the Destiny Island section. Destiny Island is quite literally the calm before the storm. It's quiet and peaceful, teaching you some of the intricacies of the combat system and setting up the characters. Sora having a youthful optimism. Riku having a desire for freedom from what he views as a prison. Kairi being their friend. The basic plot is that the home of Sora and friends is destroyed by what are known as the Heartless. Sora also gains the power of the Keyblade, a powerful weapon which can seal the hearts of worlds, preventing the Heartless from taking other worlds like they did his. He goes from world to world with Donald and Goofy, who look a bit out of place most of the time, to be honest. Now, in my opinion, the Disney worlds were always the less interesting part of Kingdom Hearts. And a controversial opinion, maybe. The visits to these worlds feel more like short stories with some thematic connection to the overall plot. In this game, it's mostly about hearts and friendship. The actual setup and resolution is in the original worlds, with the Disney worlds providing some foreshadowing and advancing some smaller plot points, like the abduction of the Disney princesses, who don't really do much. I mean, they are more like plot devices rather than characters with their own agency. Jasmine got especially shafted. Like, she gets one line, is kidnapped by Jafar, then kidnapped by Riku.
I'm so sorry, Aladdin.
Wow, such a compelling portrayal of this character. Don't get me wrong, the Disney worlds are fun for the most part, but the most interesting and memorable moments aren't on those worlds. Now let's talk about the main trio, Sora, Riku, and Kairi. Sora's the protagonist, and he's fine. Likeable and good-hearted, if a bit thick-headed. And his main character trait is mainly being a good-natured kid. His main arc is him confronting his own doubts and insecurities, eventually overcoming them with the power of friendship. Riku's arc, while interesting, doesn't have a lot of emotional stakes for me. It feels petty. He's the friend who falls into darkness, desiring an escape from his island home, that being why he turns to the powers of darkness. Maleficent manipulates him into going against Sora by playing on his jealousy. This eventually culminates in him being possessed by the main bad guy, namely Ansem the Seeker of Darkness, the supposed leader of the Final Fantasy characters and the guy researching the Heartless, except Ansem isn't really his name, but we'll get to that later. Eventually, Riku breaks free of his control, fighting to right the wrongs he has wrought, sacrificing himself to stop the darkness from overwhelming the worlds. There are interesting ideas here, of a dissatisfaction from life leading to a fall from grace, and of someone atoning for that folly. The problem is that in the first game, it's not a particularly emotionally resonant arc. Like I said, it feels petty. Like in my opinion, the other games would do the whole redemption and atonement thing a lot better, in a lot more interesting way, but we'll get to that later. Now, Kairi is beyond bland. Unlike Riku, she doesn't really have a character arc of her own. She is defined pretty much entirely by her relationship with Sora. Like, sure, Riku's arc is mostly about him being in conflict with Sora, but not only did that explore aspects of Riku's personality, and Riku himself would be explored in more interesting ways in future games, the same can't really be said for Kairi. Her existence is to like Sora and to be liked by Sora. I mean, in this game, she is literally unconscious most of the time, serving as something for Sora to find, appearing only as hallucinations to Sora. She does wake up eventually, but that doesn't fix the problems. There are some moments that work fine in isolation, but they don't build anything substantial and they don't work in context because of how bland Kairi is as a whole. These moments amount to a gesture of a better character that could have been. The series as a whole kind of builds up Kairi while simultaneously pushing her to the sidelines, which is honestly one of my bigger frustrations with this frickin' series. The characters aren't at their strongest in this game, but the setting is engaging and the stakes are interesting. Some moments were awkward, but there were some moments that really resonated with me. And there is a charm to exploring the worlds as well. Grabbing hidden chests and getting around into odd places. The game controls smoothly and, it feels good to move. That's a good thing in a game. Now, I want to give particular mention to the final world. Not only with the sense of finality and the ending of a journey, but in how alien and strange the world is. Full of impossible yet beautiful terrain, with stronger Heartless and a grand and epic score, even gesturing back to the previous worlds you visited, with the final destination of the game and the location of the final boss being a corrupted version of Sora's home. What can I say? I think it's neat. Although for me, the biggest draw of the series is the combat, especially its future refinements. While fun, the combat here is simpler and less hectic than the future games, and honestly, it's not engaging enough to prevent random encounters from dragging. Fighting a lot of Heartless definitely feels tedious. Thankfully, the bosses are way better to fight. Not only is fighting a single enemy more engaging in and of itself, but the bosses, more so than the regular Heartless, encourage you to learn the intricacies of the combat system. Figuring out how to dodge, how to learn your opponent, how to find when to attack. The regular Heartless are just a grind, but the bosses require a level of engagement that they don't. The collectibles are also pretty interesting. In general, 100%ing the game can be pretty engaging, with some amount of grinding though to get all the way there. There's the Ansem reports detailing the lore. Pages of a Winnie the Pooh book that unlocks parts of that world. A bunch of Dalmatians lost in space. I do have to wonder how puppies end up in a chest in the guts of a space whale. There are also enemy gauntlets, secret keyblades, secret bosses. I'm quite fond of the secret bosses in particular, if just because of how hard and creative they are. They test your mastery of the combat in a way that regular enemies and even the regular bosses don't. Kingdom Hearts is an imperfect but mesmerizing game for me, even if the first game in the series is rather quaint. The big moments are less bombastic, the concepts less heady, and the combat simpler. But it's still fun. Despite some flaws in the characterization department, there's still plenty of likable characters. Despite some clunkiness and goofiness, the plot is still charming. Despite the Disney worlds being less good in my humble opinion in terms of story, they're still fun. The combat, while simpler than future outings, is still engaging. While the Heartless can get dull when there's a lot of them, there are still great bosses that truly get the most out of the combat. Kingdom Hearts is an obviously flawed series, but I still love it. I could pick it apart for days, but I would still be glad that I played it.
I'm so sorry, Aladdin.